Welcome back. You're watching Front Row. We're talking about devolution and the BBI. What are some of the proposals that have been made away from the politics? What are some of the issues? How will they affect you and I in the long run in the event Kenyans actually indeed adopt this particular document? We've had opening remarks from Professor Sihanya and Wanjiru Gikonyo. Kevin Osido is the Executive Director, County Governance Watch. You work a lot with counties. I believe you have read this document. Just quickly take us through. I want us to really rush through a number of these issues. Take us through what you think works and what does not work. Where are the gaps?
So thank you so much, Akisa. I think one of the chapters that I think the crafters of the BBI report really did quite, in my view, a lot of good work in terms of listening to Kenyans and interacting with the experiences that devolved governance players at the county levels and also at the national level really interact with on a daily basis, as Professor Sihanya and my good friend Wanjiru rightfully said in their opening remarks. 10 years on, what is it for devolution and why should we be talking about devolution as one of the 9 key agenda issues? When the report came out, I liked the crafting of the chapter on devolution because they were able to identify the challenges that Kenyans are facing and also propose solutions, which they kept saying, Kenyans said this, they told us this, and this is what we therefore recommend. And one of those things, Akisa, was how to deal with theft, graft, theft of public funds. And we have seen governors being taken to court. Some of them have faced impeachment motions. Others have been successfully impeached. Public officers, even at the national level, when we talk about corruption, it is quite a huge thing. And so the BBI comes out with very interesting things to be able to, interesting recommendations to be able to present to Kenyans. The second issue was functions that are still held at the national level and are supposed to be, devolved at the counties, particularly by different state semi-autonomous government agencies and different state agencies. And most of them therefore fall within the Ministry of Agriculture. And yet agriculture, as per the Constitution, Schedule 4, is largely a devolved function. So the BBI says this is a gap that we have listened to from Kenyans speak to us. And so we recommend, therefore, that within this particular period of time, these functions need to be sent to the county level. And Akisa and viewers, you'll remember that when devolution began, we had a team that was put in place called the Task Force on Devolved Governance, which really brought out, I think they actually even published a report on issues which they identified when Kenya transitioned from the local government to the devolved system of government. And some of these issues were basically what we are talking about. The third issue, which I think is very fundamental, is what Wanjiru has talked about. Transfer of functions, transfer of resources to counties. And Akisa, why I say I like the crafting of this report is because if you read the amendment in Article 202 of the Constitution, the BBI report even gives you the solution to the problem for which Kenyans have been facing when Senate and National Assembly has failed to agree. And they have therefore empowered the Auditor General and the Treasury to be able to act within the proposed amendment that when the houses fail to agree, then what you need to do is the most recently audited accounts of revenue submitted by the Auditor General shall be taken as the account of revenue for that particular purpose, so that counties don't need to be stifled of resources. And of course, we are looking at the context within which the different jurisdictions have also been undertaken and the prevailing jurisprudence. For instance, the High Court case that Wanjiru was talking about. We're also talking about issues to do with general service delivery. The BBI report has strengthened public participation for citizens by making recommendations and proposals such as a public participation policy. Yes, of course, county governments have public participation acts which they have put in place, and the county assemblies have done a very good work to be able to effect that. But there's never a threshold of public participation. So for instance, in a sub-county that has 140,000 people, if you're undertaking public participation, how many people must be present in that particular forum so that we stop seeing counties, mistreating citizens by asking them to appear, for instance, for meetings, for decisions that have already been either dispensed through WhatsApp groups or Facebook pages or among several other things. So I think for me, the chapter on devolution, in a way, 10 years on, looking at the gaps that have already been outlined by various stakeholders and the practice that is currently on the context, I think, Akisa, The BBI report has made attempts to strengthen devolution as per the recommendations that have been made.
Let me speak to Dennis Kabara. You've worked with several counties, and especially on public finance and management. You've heard what all the other panelists have had to say. But I'm very keen on how counties are managing finances. This is your area, and I'd want you to take us through how, from where you sit, counties are managing finances. We're talking about sending more money to the counties, 35% equitable share, the Ward Development Fund, 5% of the revenue of the county. But let's talk about how counties are managing with what they have already. Talk to us about that, and then so an increase of funds. What are we likely to see?
I think, let me just start. 2 days ago, I think it's 2 days ago, the Commission of Revenue Allocation published their recommendations on the equitable share. And one of the important things, I think they've done some very good analysis, and I think there are two numbers that should interest us. They've taken all the counties all together, and they said on aggregate, counties are spending about 74% of their money on recurrent costs. They're spending, they're not getting to 30% on development. So that's the first thing. So when we're thinking about increasing this share, we're thinking, where does this money actually go? There's a second analysis which is actually in that report, which is more interesting, and I think we should all look at it, which says the highest spending item on average across counties. When I say on average across counties, this is an aggregate figure. So of course, each county has got its different spending pattern. But the highest item of spending is actually administration. So even within the largely recurrent budget, much of it is going to administration. In fact, administration is spending as much as roads, health, and education combined. So I think there's something there which is beyond BBI and beyond kind of manipulating policy and so on, that needs us to get to how do we get counties spending on priorities. And one of the ways I think the Commission of Revenue Allocation has done is to propose these proportions, that your allocation is based on the proportions you get. I think it's kind of a suggestion. I don't think it's something that's prescriptive. But I think, for me, those are some of the questions. Before even we get to the wider questions of if government can afford 35%, that's a bigger question, right? Just even with the 15%, what is this money actually going into? And I think the analysis that comes from the Commission on Revenue Allocation is much of it is actually going to administration, whereas a lot more should be going, and not enough is going to development. If we look at this over 10 years.
So is it a lack of...
So for me, that is where I would start.
Yes. So then is it lack of prioritization? Is it a systemic issue? Is it a planning issue? What is it?
I think there's an issue to do with skills, definitely. There's an experience, because counties basically are new. They're brand new. So there's an issue to do with experience, skills, and so on. But I think there's also an issue to do with, shall I call it, incentives. Spending on development is complicated work. Spending on projects is complicated work. It's much easier to spend on recurrent costs. This is a habit. One of the reasons why we have so much trouble in our whole kind of fiscal situation is not because of the amount we're spending on development, even though it's excessive in terms of expensive projects at the national level, but it's also because we are unable to cut down the recurrent costs. And it's the same at counties. It's easier to spend recurrent money, remembering that, of course, a big part of that is wages. But even beyond wages, it's easier to procure services, goods and services. It's much easier to procure goods and services than to implement complex projects. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the things we need to start learning from.
Right, thank you. And you throw us into another big conversation there on how counties prioritize their spending. Prof, I left you at where you said, some of the proposals that have been made should have kickstarted a long time ago. Which are these proposals that you think should have kickstarted, and how impactful would they have been then to counties as they are right now, even without this whole political process around the BBI that will perhaps lead to an eventual referendum?
Thank you so much. I have in front of me the BBI October 2020. And from pages 131 to 135, they deal with issues of devolution. And just a few of them are important in terms of administrative reforms. In fact, as I said earlier, BBI should be read holistically, not selectively. Holistically in terms of the control proposals, amendment proposals, the policy, the legislative, and the admin. And for some of the administrative reforms that were proposed here are, for example, parastatals that carry out county government functions should be restructured. Allocation process of the resources should be made simple and easy so that the people could understand them much more easily. Issues of greater transparency in the management of resources generated by counties. CRA, Commission on Revenue Allocation, to help with, to assess what counties actually collect and how they spend it. And I think there is also the question of disbursement of the 15%. Its disbursement still there have been challenges and so many delays. The chaos in the health sector is both a problem of the national government and a problem of the county government. Is a major challenge to the devolution. Most of the issues there are actually administrative. Some are legislative, some are policy, some have control implications, but most of them are actually administrative. The question of inclusivity, diversity in the various parastatals, whether at national government level or county government level, universities, etc., etc. These are things which, by now, there should be a clear policy, a clear framework, administrative policy framework on addressing them. There have been complaints year in, year out by NCIC, by the Public Service Commission about lack of diversity, lack of inclusivity, including in our universities and including in our various county government and national government agencies. Very little is actually being done. I think in some cases it's actually getting worse. Government spending vertically.
Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sorry to cut you short, but quickly, why do you think it's taken us this long to sort out some of these issues you talk about?
This is partly what I have called the logic of Kenya's governance structure, the logic of Kenya's constitutional democracy since independence. It has been based on patronage. It has been based on privilege and prejudice, 3 Ps. It is very difficult to transform that. It has been a problem of values, the problem of ethos, the problem of shared prosperity, and that's why in BBI we wrote it as Article 10. In fact, it's there as Article 11A. 11A with 10A being regional integration and cohesion, which is important, and then 11A, economy and shared prosperity. This idea that we should have shared prosperity has not sunk into those who control the state apparatus and the county government apparatus. But BBI is now, when implemented, when passed as a constitutional amendment bill, it will be a strong basis to litigate. It will be a strong basis for policy. So the logic we have been operating in has been selfishness, unfathomable greed, exclusion, especially of an ethnic nature. Okay. And that's why the values and principles are very, very important, which are being promoted by BBI, especially economy and shared prosperity.
Fair enough, Prof. Wanjiru, we've had here and there, each panelist really talked about, what might be ailing devolution. But looking at this document, does it speak to the needs of the counties? Does it solve the problem?
Thank you. Thank you, Akisa. And In fact, this conversation is symptomatic of the problems with the BBI process, because BBI gives us constitutional recommendations, policy recommendations, and legislative recommendations. And the professor tells us to look at each holistically. But the reality is, right now, the only thing that is on the table is the constitutional amendments. And there is no guarantee that once they're enacted, that we'll then get the policy or the legislation, because this government actually has a very poor record of implementing devolution-related, even constitutional-related policy or legislation. So let us be honest with the people of Kenya. The discussion on the table is the Constitution Amendment Bill. And that is what we need to look at. The Constitutional Amendment Bill does not deal with the functional issues that are ailing devolution. It does not deal with the weaknesses in the Senate that are ailing devolution. It does not strengthen citizen say, sovereignty, self-governance. It does not strengthen that. That is what is ailing devolution. It does not strengthen transparency, accountability, access to information, to make governors accountable to citizens. It does not do that. What it does do is it gives the 35%, which is good, but then it also gives these other sweeteners. It creates this, gives the CDF constitutional status. And in so doing, creates a fourth or fifth level of governance, which contradicts the basic doctrine of our Constitution of Kenya. So let us be honest with Kenyans. Right now, the problem with BBI is that the conversation is confusing. Mm-hmm. You can't even have eminent professors like you have here, experienced governance experts like Kibara, who is here, and have a coherent conversation. Because what are we talking about? So this confusion is going to go to citizens, and what's happening, if citizens vote yes or no, they won't know what they're voting on. Okay. They'll actually vote because either they're supporting the administration or not. All right. So the BBI process is the first challenge, because it is not clear. It is not by not being clear, therefore it will lack legitimacy. All right, Wanjiru. And people might inadvertently vote for something that they don't want. Okay, you've made your point. You've made your point. One last point. Yes. Let me disagree very much with what Kevin said, that the proposal, the section on devolution is very well framed. I do not agree it is well framed, because it is very difficult to interpret. Mm-hmm. It lacks the clarity, and it fails to deal with the core issues, with several of the core issues that are undermining devolution, especially the lack of citizen engagement, citizen say. That is missing entirely. Fair enough, fair enough. I know, Kevin, you'll start from that point, where Wanjiru, the point of departure between you and Wanjiru. But then when we're having this conversation about resources, we can't run away from just how much counties are generating by themselves. Even when we're talking about more money, we're talking about at least 5% to the World Development Fund. I imagine we are also thinking that counties will up their revenue generation. How can they do this? Kevin, that's you. So, Akisa, you want me to begin from... respond to Wanjiru, I'll give you the right of reply there. No, let me do the response later, but let me get back to your question. I think it's a much more exciting one. If you look at all the 47 counties, all these counties have something they are good at and something which they know how to do very well. If you are to give governors adequate chance, resources, opportunities, and that time to be able to think through the county integrated development process planning process, they will tell you what Nairobi is good at. The Mandera people will tell you what they can be able to manufacture or produce. Lamu people will tell you what can come out of that island. If you go to Kisumu, there is something so good and so beautiful about it. You go to Kisii with their soapstone, there is quite enormous resource, and you run to Taita Taveta all the way to the coast, Mombasa, all the 47 counties.
there is something they are good at. And that is something also that the BBI process has very clearly captured in my view. And Wanjiru, these are my views. I'm not saying that we need to pick them. I am just saying that I like how the crafters and the drafters of the BBI report on the chapter of devolution did their work. And it's because even the question that you're asking me, Akisa, I just missed that particular clause, but it actually tells you that the BBI report gives space, chance, and opportunity for Kenyans to sit together and identify their priorities, so that you begin telling people, if, for example, Murang'a can be able to produce milk, why would a governor put in the CIDP priorities which do not resonate with what the citizens of Murang'a County are feeling? And why send resources to Murang'a County to be able to do things which are not adding value, including how the county government is taxing people, because you must ensure that services are being delivered and that resources are also following functions and vice versa, and that you're able to create opportunity for these resources to recycle back to the citizens through taxes, through the different channels of on-source revenue, because that's one of the things that counties are actually struggling with, that every time we have to go back to Exchequer to ask for resources. All the 47 counties have something, Akisa, which they are very good at, and if given the opportunity to be able to bring out that beauty, why not bring it and then be able to translate it into provide a value chain, which of course counties also have their own independent human resource people who can be able to come up and share expertise in terms of what they're doing. For instance, I was watching Mheshimiwa Kiambu Governor this morning on your program, and he was just telling people how his skills, expertise, and of course experience in the agriculture sector through Rockefeller Foundation has helped them to be able to empower citizens at the grassroots level. And that's what we are saying, that if you give citizens an opportunity to think through their priorities and give them ample platforms and opportunities to be able to craft how to craft and recommend how to run their county governments, resources are going to be there, so much such that what comes from the Exchequer is basically an addition. Now, am I going to just make two more?
Yes. I want us to go to Kabara before we go on a break.
This report and the bill, Akisa, is very categorical. It has also told us that when counties are getting money from Exchequer, Amendment Article 203 of the Constitution, Clause 50 here says that in that Clause 1, by inserting the following, so you insert the need to eradicate corruption, corrupt practices and wastage of public resources. So one of the work that Wanjiru Gikonyo and myself and several other governance and leadership organizations will be doing is to empower citizens to hold their counties, their county governments to account insofar as how much they have been able to put in mechanisms and systems to eradicate corrupt practices and also wastage of resources. Number 2, it says the need to ensure the attainment of economic and social rights guaranteed under Article 43. These are social and economic rights for which Kenyans are waking up every day asking for the county and national governments, the various agencies and departments to be able to deliver. And so the BBI is saying we are going to guarantee resources based on how counties are ensuring that citizens are gaining and benefiting from these particular services that then lead towards economic and social rights.
Fair enough, Kevin.
Last but not least, if you read that report in page 133, the issue that Kibara was addressing, the ratio between development spending and recurrent expenditure in the counties should match the national one at 70-30. And then the priority here is that it is so high.
So what you're saying
is the report
everything
has
is
also
covered.
made amendments to the fiscal policy, which is supposed to give effect to that particular recommendation.
So what you're saying is everything is covered?
In my view, I will repeat what I said at the beginning, that out of the 9 issues, I think I am very confident, and I would give a score of A- to the drafters of the devolution chapter of the BBI
Let's hear what Kenyans will say. I'll be taking a look at some of their comments, see if they will also be giving A-. Kabara, we are seeing that among the recommendations, we are seeking to improve or rather enhance the oversight role of the county, of the Senate rather, on this county government. Talk to us about that. How will this impact then the management of finances in the counties?
I think that's a tricky one. I think, there are two things. Can I just take a step back? When the BBI was formulated and we had the 9 issues, the issue on devolution was very simple. 2 problems. One, political exclusion. In other words, every county or many counties were looking like ethnic conclaves. Second, economic viability. Some counties were too small to be viable economically. Those are the two questions that BBI, at the time of the handshake, was supposed to address. A lot of the things we're seeing now are kind of second-level issues, and we don't know if we addressed the first one, because in the second case, for example, in the case of economic viability, we've basically said we're keeping all 47 counties, and then we'll promote regional blocks. And then in terms of things like the changes to the role of the Senate, for me those are structural things. Okay, like for example, splitting up Article 218 into A for the Division of Revenue Bill and B for the County Allocation of Revenue Bill, that is fine. That will reduce the conflict between them. And then the other changes that improve oversight, I think that's useful. But there's still a conceptual point that we miss. Who does the Auditor General report to? Because there's county assemblies on one hand, and he has the Senate on the other. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure we've resolved that. We've resolved that issue as an oversight issue. Because in the same way that the National Executive is oversighted by the National Assembly, so the county executive is oversighted by the county assembly. So where does the Senate come in? I'm not sure that's the oversight question I don't think we've tackled yet.
Right.
If I may just make the comment there.
Yes. So ideally, how should we go about that? What's the best way? What would be the best practice, even from elsewhere, that we can pick?
That's a tricky one. I know. I think what the Auditor General tried to do,
yeah.
The previous Auditor General, when he was doing his report, he tried and do one report specific for each county that goes to the county assembly for that county. Then his idea was that the Senate would do an overview report. But then the point is, who is the overview report about?
Yeah.
So that, for me, that is still something that's hanging in the air.
Okay.
In terms of accountability.
And a quick one, in a minute, if you're able to, because I want us to go on a break. You have worked in these counties. You have seen where the problems are. You began by saying that how do we get counties to prioritize? We're spending more on administration. But even looking at how the general engagements and how they go about their business, what are some of the key things that you've picked that are similar in a number of these counties? In under a minute, I want us to go on a break.
I think let's be fair to counties. Because of the demands of the Constitution and the County Government Act, they're getting much better with public participation, which is the whole point 1.0 is making. Getting citizens to be engaged, they're improving. It's not perfect yet, but in many cases, at least on the planning and budgeting side, they're doing quite well. I think what we need to do is to get that oversight and citizen engagement on the other side, the side of implementation, reporting, monitoring, and results.
Right.
So that citizens are not just contributing to decisions.
Okay.
But they also support implementation, and then they hold government to account. Those are the two things they're not doing: supporting implementation and holding government to account.
That's a good place to stop. When we get back, I'm seeing a lot of feedback. I'll be taking a look at a number of tweets and text messages, some of them questions to a panelist. If you have any, remember the hashtag to use is front row for me to be able to track your responses. Text line is 22155. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back with the last part of the front row. I'm really...
This is KTN News.